You know, one of the parts of AboveTopSecret.com that I truly appreciate is, even though we are the largest site for conspiracy theory discussion and the topics in general, alternative topics in general, we have a very large percentage of our membership that are very skeptical people, and they actually do employ critical thought, and I sincerely appreciate that. And one of the big things that comes up as we focus in on these conspiracy theories that our membership is pretty good about picking up on is the evidence, you know, the control of the evidence, the reality of the evidence, really digging through and back-checking. And I would just love your professional opinion as a forensic scientist that, you know, maybe you could shed some light on the proper ways that if somebody presents conspiracy theory, what are you really looking for as far as the evidence? You know, it's one thing for a guy to come on a website and say, well, you know, I'm a secret agent and I have the information that proves that the government engineered H1N1 and put it out there. Obviously, that's pretty weak. But if someone were to actually really look into any reality behind some of these conspiracy theories, what's the proper path, or what would you look for as a professional forensic scientist as far as the evidence chain goes?
I understand exactly what you're talking about, and I guess the only way I can answer that is to tell you what I do, and that's imperfect. But I put it through a couple of different filters. In addition to what I talked about a moment ago, let me be a little more clear. The first filter has to do with the source. And that is to say, if somebody has face validity, then I immediately pay more serious attention even to an outlandish claim. For example, if a person is an A1 source, and by A1 I mean that is a person who, in a categorization that we use in intelligence from A to F in terms of the quality of the individual, that is to say, an A source would be an individual who would have all the right degrees, all the right background, and all the right academic credentials, for example. And an F source would be an individual that would be talking about something that they would be way over their head and talking about, and they'd never had any ostensible credentials in at all. And then a 1 through 6, which would be, is the individual that is prepared the information for us or for the ATS audience, an individual who knowingly and unarguably had access to the information. And again, a number 6 in that category was somebody that there's no earthly reason that that individual would have been able to get that information. So, okay, an A1 source would be a person that was clearly academically qualified in, say, virology, and was reporting on information from his or her own laboratory in their own company. That's an A1 source. And by the way, it doesn't mean that an A1 intelligence report is necessarily true. It means, however, that you can and should pay more attention to an A1 source, a B1 source, a C1 source, or an A3 source. You get my picture? That's the first thing. On the other hand, there have been cases where somebody's come out of the woodwork with information who nobody thought had any credentials and they didn't have any access, and then with good investigation later, it turns out they did. Not very often. I'm saying that therefore you have to go to the second level of analysis. If the story that's presented makes sense in the context that it's being described. Maybe it'll be a political context, maybe it'll be a story that has to do with a group of people in a country who are known for other reasons to be involved in things that are very bad, and the story is about that same bad stuff, but maybe a different story. Then that's the second level. You have to pay attention. Then you get to the third level, and that's the part that I think you and your organization is doing a really, really good service on. Better than I think any that I can think of. There's a lot of websites out there that are doing investigation of conspiracies, and they are doing it with superb journalism, and that's great. And I occasionally look at them. And I'm, in some cases, I've even been interviewed by them, and I think they're wonderful. But what I think the group that you just referred to in your various fora are doing, which I appreciate, is you have, for whatever reason, a bunch of appropriate scientists with the appropriate credentials, with the appropriate access, that for whatever reason are willing to talk about the conspiracy. So when I go to look at a conspiracy on ATS that happens to be in my area of expertise, I can very quickly tell if the people that are doing the discussions fit in the first category I just went. Are they really professional? Do they really have the credentials? And are they making sense? And actually, that's really the only way at the end of the day to decide if a conspiracy is real or not. Because if a person isn't willing to present information that can be looked at publicly and analyzed publicly, then you just throw your hands up and say, I can't tell.
So I certainly want to know, and I would think that pretty much everyone who's going to watch this wants to know. Christopher Kit Green, with your background, your knowledge, your experience, in the world that we live in today, with all the topics that we've just discussed, what is it that keeps you up at night? What is it that makes you think twice, concern yourself about among these topics, among everything we've discussed? What keeps you up?
I wish you hadn't asked that, because I'm committed to giving you an honest answer, and so my honest answer will possibly, in some respects of people watching this, say that I've just invalidated everything that I've said in the last hour or so. But I'll give you the answer since you asked the question. I worry about two very, very related issues, and we've talked about them, but the things I really worry about are, in one sentence, what if I'm really wrong? And here's what I mean about what if I'm really wrong. I lay awake thinking about what if I'm really wrong about a specific conspiracy, okay, not in general. I just said a little while ago that in order to address and do analysis, you had to look at, if you could, A1 or A2 or B1 or B3 sources. And, you know, kind of highfalutin language about have to have a lot of scientific credibility of the people making the discussion and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is, many huge things that have occurred, beginning of World War I, beginning of World War II, beginning of the Korean War, 9/11. I could go on, but I think I'll make my point briefly. Most of those things were from C3 or C4 or D6 sources. I mean, we are very, very much plagued by the fact that very often the really serious things that happen, particularly now we're talking about stuff like terrorism, and we're talking about things like what we're talking about, where the actors are non-state and NGO actors who are not of a mindset or a belief to follow traditional value systems that we follow. When that happens, everything can get turned around. And we didn't really have circumstances up until the last decade or so where we were worried about conspiracies were because the promulgators didn't have any of our value systems of what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's decent. So I stay awake and I think about some of the, in fact, we talked about a couple of them in the last hour or so. A couple of the things we talked about have actually kept me awake, where I've thought, wait a minute, you know, why hasn't there been any explanation since March by anybody about this obscene Baxter circumstance, Why hasn't that been investigated, written about, and explained? Now, how can that be? Is it really what I just glibly said before, that there's nobody smart enough in the media to care? Well, I don't know that that's really true. But there doesn't seem to be. But so I stay awake and I wonder, well, why might that be the case? And there's several other things we talked about too. But basically it comes down to this. I spend my time doing analysis primarily of A1 and A2 and B1 and B2 information. And I lie awake at night recognizing the fact that I could be missing something.
Wow, that's going to keep me up at night now too. Thanks, kid. Okay, in closing, I think it's a fair question to ask you. What do you plan to do to continue to stay on top of this and investigate this pandemic and the associated vaccines? And what do you think the AboveTopSecret.com community, with its vast global reach, thousands, millions of people, can do to continue to not only seek out and discover at the C1, D1, C5 level very important, potentially very important information about the conspiracies, not only relative to the swine flu, but all the other stuff that we've talked about and a lot of the stuff that we haven't talked about.
Let's talk about the H1N1 swine flu first. I'm going to spend my investigation time on this issue trying to focus more than I have in the past on the C3 data, the data that is becoming common now on the internet and common on blogs that are making assertions of individuals who have been harmed, that is, with serious side effects from the vaccine, with deaths occurring soon after getting vaccinated. Those things that I said earlier, I have no information that would support. But I'm going to be spending more time for the simple reason that that information is so highly critical and so highly important, if any of it's true, and also because it can be addressed professionally. That is, if I have some information that somebody sends me of the name of an individual who died, as opposed to just a list of very nondescript information on a blog site. But if somebody were to send me, and they occasionally do, the name of an individual in a city who had a brother die or a sister die or something terrible that happened after, I will be spending some more time calling that individual, asking their permission if I can talk to their physician. So that's what I'm going to do. Spend more time on the middle of the data rather than the stuff that's so complicated most of the time I can't understand it anyway, which is the virology and the molecular biology of it. And now I think that as far as your broader question, what can we do about all the other, the plethora of conspiracies out there? I think that I would recommend that anything that you can do to allow your people to, or encourage your people to identify themselves more, at least in terms of their technical and scientific or political or access credentials, do so. I see a lot of things, not only on ATS, but on a lot of other sites, where there are conspiracies being talked about, where it really sounds like the writer is very, very bright. And I get maybe through 5 or 6 pages, and then I start getting a really feeling of discomfort because I begin to wonder whether or not what I'm reading isn't just really good writing. And I would really like to have, particularly if it's a technical issue, somebody that says they know about a shipment of something bad that went to Mexico that was doped. Okay, I'd really like someone to be able to say, and by the way, I am a microbiologist and I work for the supply company of the vaccine, and I'm a whistleblower. I'd kind of like to know that. Or I'd like to have somebody, if they have a long article about something, say, and incidentally I'm a biochemist, or incidentally I'm a virologist, or I'm a physician. I I guess the short answer to your question is, I really think there's a lack of identification of the people who are hiding behind their avatars. And if we're ever going to do anything about really investigating conspiracy, the game of avatars has got to be minimized.
That's a fascinating statement, Kit, because one of the beautiful parts of the internet is the ability to be fairly anonymous. And for the record, I want to state that on AboveTopSecret.com, anyone who wants to come forward has an avenue and a means by which they can do it, yet still retain their privacy and protect their identity online, and that's by contacting either myself or Bill, who our avatars are Springer and Skeptic Overlord, and that's a huge part of the culture online. And I agree with you to the extent that yes, if somebody's going to claim to be an expert, we typically do attempt to vet them. The membership will call for it. But that's an interesting thing coming from you with your background. I assure you, our membership who just watched you say that is recoiling a bit, going, well, of course the CIA guy is going to want to know who I am, because that's one of the huge conspiracy theories that maybe there's not a whole lot of doubt about, that the internet is also a very good place to monitor and a very good place to follow trends and learn what people are thinking, what they're doing. And there's a whole other issue, we could get into that. But I would like your response to what do you have to say to the people who are very, very nervous about someone like you, not necessarily today in your career today, but your career of 20 years ago. A lot of our membership would be very hesitant and very concerned about ever revealing themselves to the intelligence agencies who they fear.
Fair enough. And I hadn't thought about that when I made the comment that I did, but I totally accept it and I understand it. And my very short answer to that is similar to the very first thing that I said in this discussion, which is anybody that believes that exposing themselves or their identity in an issue related to privacy is not something that they're comfortable doing because of distrust shouldn't do it. I actually don't think they should do it at all, because I can't argue that what you just said isn't a very valid concern. Did not happen to be valid in terms of myself or what I said, but I could never in a million years argue that that isn't a valid concern. So I think that what you've really posed is, it's frankly, it's a area, the issue that has to do with privacy, and in my case as a physician, medical legal issues of privacy are very important to me. And in the sense of my past background with the government, absolutely issues of privacy and who's inveigling information that we would like to keep from our government is very valid. It's really the subject of another interview. It doesn't have much to do any longer after this discussion with H1N1. And I'd love to be invited back someday to talk maybe as part of a panel or something on the issue of what really should be kept private and what shouldn't be kept private. And maybe have people of different persuasions that will be on the panel to debate with each other. I'd be very happy to do that. As far as these issues of science and science conspiracy are concerned, I'll just conclude by saying probably a better way for me to have said what I said would be not to have somebody come out from behind their avatar and disclose who they are, but to in some way in the writing, the good writing often that they do, make it clear that they are an A or a B level source in terms of their credentials. And that would help me a great deal.
Kit, it has absolutely been a pleasure. You've been an absolute gentleman and a great source of information. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your candor. And I know that it's not a real easy thing for someone in your position to come out and talk about these issues as forthrightly and frankly as you have today, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Mark, I am very grateful that you came here and that you made it so convenient for me, and I really enjoyed the discussion. I noted that we didn't agree on everything, and that's fine, but I felt that you asked me the right questions, and I'm satisfied that I was treated fairly, and I'm glad that you had this opportunity for our having this discussion. You're welcome, and thank you.